Alright, my dear buds. So, fun fact, this is going to be a video on who needs a rework. I was I was looking through a variety of frames. I was looking at kind of the severity of how much of each one would need a rework. And when I went when I got to our dear day and night lady, um it I ended up with I kid you not, an hour of footage. So I kind of sat down, I went, okay, this isn't working out. Um I didn't realize I had scripted that much, first of all, but whatever. Uh so yeah, we're just gonna do a video on literally just Equinox, and I think she needs a rework. Now, I've heard other people talk about, oh, like this is how she should be redone. And I think, everyone has very interesting ideas. Some ideas I agree with, some I don't really. Some are common agreements, others are just a bit out there. And just wouldn't really fit, in my humble opinion at least. So I'm just gonna talk about what I know about Equinox, what I think about Equinox, and you're free to agree, disagree, anything in between. Um, I do want to know what your thoughts are on Equinox's place in current day Warframe, and what you think could be done about her, because I think, and I've seen it in like the dev short chats and everything. I believe Miss Rebecca Ford herself even acknowledged it. They're not doing an Equinox rework anytime soon. Um, like, but people have been requesting, and for good reason, in my opinion. So yeah, Equinox, huh? So I'm not gonna be teaching you Equinox's kit right now because that'll make this video even longer. Instead, I'm gonna talk to you about the issues each part of her kit has. Okay? Because that, yeah, let's keep things not any longer winded than they have to be. I apologize for the intro being this long. So, let's start. The passive. 10% equilibrium passive. 10% of the value of your health orb picked up turns into energy. 10% of your energy orb turns into health. Now, of course, 50 health from each basic health orb turns into 5 energy. That's not a lot. You need the average Equinox build to keep it up, which is quite a bit. And not always easy to do or rely on, unless you have a cracked out energy generating orb generating build. So it's currently just negligible sustain. I've had cases where it just made more sense to slot arcane energize and call it a day. Yeah, use like a death cube with energy generator. Like, the fact of the matter is that there's a lot of cases in which it's just not impactful, and it doesn't really encourage like use of it. Partly because Equinox itself doesn't really generate any orbs, so it just feels like, oh, here's like an extra thing you can do, but it doesn't. Nothing else in her kit really uh encourages the use of her passive. It's just kind of there. So her first ability, her first ability is meant to be what makes her her, right? Equinox, her first ability to swap between day and night and to gain a little either damage boost or survivability boost, that is meant to be what makes her her. But to put it very bluntly, it's not. It's being subsumed off, like, all the time, basically, for just anything else. People would rather play an easier day build or night build than interact with the swapping mechanic, which sounds like, and I don't want to be mean. Do not be mean to DE. I know they're doing their best, and I know they've made like 60-something frames by now. It just seems like a failure of design, or rather failure to keep up with current design. And that is a shame. That is, simply put, a shame. Yeah, the bonuses you get from swapping are also just not enough to justify keeping it unless you can get value out of the rest of the day and night, which you are going to see more of as I go through this video. So let's go into a second ability, because it's hard to explain the issues with the day and night swapping incentive without going through the others. A second ability, Rest and Rage. Rest can open up the finishers, which is cool. Rest can also take pressure off of defense objectives and other things. Right? Rest is crowd control, which is handy. Even if people say it's dead or whatever, rest crowd control is handy, is useful. Rage, however, Rage speeds enemies up, right, and makes them take more damage, which it sounds like Speed Nova. Now, rather than play Equinox, people just ran Nova with the speed boost, with negative strength back in the day before they reworked that to a tap hold. And I think that kind of speaks enough about the issues that Rest and Rage have. Its casting is like a kind of a projectile, and then and then the area around it. We see here I target the area, and then they're kind of faster, but only kind of. And it's not a huge area. So, Rage, it does give a damage vulnerability, sure, but it's not very impactful. Obviously, it does have its augment to spread it, but the issue is the spread also just, it doesn't feel like much of a propagation. I actually don't have too much of a problem with Rest and Rage, but I am gonna request changes for it anyways. Now, Pacify and Provoke. Pacify and Provoke. Pacify, despite saying, oh, it's got damage reduction, right? Reduces enemy damage dealt. That's not... Now, okay, so first of all, let me talk about the good. The good. It has a good, it has the effect on Overguard, it has the effect on allies, because it reduces enemy damage dealt rather than reducing your damage taken. So I think that's a good thing, I think that it's good that that we have an ability that is just debuffing the enemies around you. So even though it might feel like just damage reduction, it's damage reduction of the enemy's damage dealt instead, which, yeah, I just think it's good, basically. However, what's not good is the fact that there is a damage fall-off. Now, let me just walk you through this, right? Now, if you're in a fight, and there's melee units, and there's range units, now, the ranged units, right? The ranged units can hit you, but the melee units need to approach you in order to be able to hit you. That makes sense, right? Now, the melee units, on their way to you, when they reach you, they will have damage reduction. But the ranged units, which will be further away, will have less damage reduction, and they're the ones who can hit you. So it's just not very effective. Now, Pacify also has the issue of cost. Ability energy cost, scaling with enemies affected. So the more enemies you are reducing the damage of, the more energy you're draining, which basically equates to by no more sustain for you, which means you run out of damage reduction, which means you die. Now Provoke has a similar issue. It scales with allies affected, except instead it's ability cost, which is arguably not as bad, but it's still bad. And ability strength in Warframe is just not that hard to come by, first of all. But second of all, Bright Bonnet right now exists. Bright Bonnet's subsumable. Bright Bonnet does the opposite of Provoke. Instead of draining energy, it gives you energy. It runs on a timer instead of being channeled, and it doesn't cost more for every ability you affect. Oh, and guess what? Bright Bonnet's base value is also higher. Now, for the next ability, now this ability instead, okay, so I know like force abilities are usually meant to be like the ultimates or whatever, so it's kind of meant to be like a big thing. But it should be the pinnacle of the kit, not the one thing in the kit that people play her for. The one thing that has kept Equinox as a frame that people would say isn't bad, the one thing that's kept her alive in that sense, both literally and figuratively, is Mend and Maim. Now, Mend restores shields on kill, which is pretty okay, I think. It restores for stuff like catalyzing shields, and if you have a decent KPM, you could theoretically just shield tank, although I personally would not recommend it because it becomes incredibly enemy density dependent. Now, Maim, what does Maim even do? Yeah, the issue with Maim is that it deals just a single slash proc at the start, and it's basically token. It's basically you say, okay, I've hit this thing. This thing's in range. Like there's no there's no other reason for there to be a slash proc than to just say, okay, this thing's in range. It doesn't do extra damage on kills, so if you're in day form, you're charging it up. You have to get a bunch of kills, and then you deactivate it, and then there's a huge damage at the back. And this damage at the back is affected by stuff like armor, which means that I've seen builds where they're like, oh, to use the main, we're going to use the Terrify or Pillage so that there's an armor strip. Which, again, now the helmet is Band-Aid, right? A lot of the time. The helmet is like a massive Band-Aid for a lot of weaknesses in different frames, and Equinox is definitely one of the frames that benefits greatly from these Band-Aids, but it just shows that there's a problem with the base kit. Maim does nothing until you deactivate it, and yeah. So, the only thing that people really use Mend and Maim for, as far as I've seen, has been to use the energy transfer augment to shield gate a shield tank, and then when they see a big bad, then they use energy transfer, they explode their maim, and then they rinse and repeat. There's no like, oh, I'm using maim constantly. It's only I'm using maim at the end just to explode, which I don't think is healthy. I think maim should do something, and mend. Okay, mend's burst should also do something, because currently mend is a wave of healing. It works on defense objectives and operatives, which is nice, but very niche. So yes. Okay. Okay, there we go. So on to the augments. First off, for her one, duality. Duality is a fun augment, right? Duality, I will say, I like it a lot. Having the other side fight alongside you is nice. In fact, we're gonna get a frame very soon, which basically has the same thing, but built in, and I am, I was a little vexed by that, but we're not here to talk about either of them right now. Now, duality is great, I don't mind it. Now, for her 2. Her 2 has Calm and Frenzy, spreads the effect of Rest and Rage on kill. Or it's supposed to, I can't really tell. I think it's a fine augment. I don't think it should be built into her base kit, because not everyone will want to spread the effect. Sometimes you just want to rest like a group of enemies, but not everybody, so it's an understandable augment, you know. I think it is like just a benefit, it's not really a change, and I don't think that's a bad thing in this case, just because, you know, like as far as Equinox and how she plays goes, it does give you some options to how you want to use, like how often you want to use Rest and Rage. It's kind of an okay augment. It's not that bad. Peaceful Provocation, however, for some reason has a build up. Peaceful Provocation is against Equinox. Okay, I'm just gonna say that. On one side you have the Gloom effect on damage taken. That's right, damage taken in Warframe, which sounds like it could be easy until you remember the fact that the moment you swap day and night form, that's why provoke gets turned off, which means you keep having to take damage in order to have the slow effect of Peaceful Provocation. You know what you could also do? You could just subsume Gloom from the Helminth to work as your slow. Obviously it wouldn't have the damage reduction, but considering they're already slowed, it's sometimes just a more comfortable, safe option than trying to build it up every time you swap to night form. Now, alongside it comes Provoke. Now, I mentioned earlier that Provoke it's mogged, kind of, and also just isn't that necessary because ability strength in this current day and age isn't that hard to find. Peaceful Provocation, instead of, you know, a new effect, right, which Pacify has, right, just gives you more ability strength. So it's again just not, it just doesn't do much for you. You could probably use it to snapshot a few things, but it just isn't very impactful, and it just feels like a waste. And again, there's that build up, and every time you swap, you have to build it up again, which basically is against the point of Equinox, I would argue, right? Instead of day or night, you're just picking night form, or maybe just picking day form if for some reason you really want that ability strength. Because you don't want to lose the accumulated value of Peaceful Provocation. Now, on to Mend and Maims augment, Energy Transfer. Energy Transfer is a band-aid. Energy Transfer should be in the base kit. Again, it's about build-up that goes away the moment you swap. Mend and Maim at base is also just against the point of her one. So this is kind of a band-aid augment so that you can actually swap without losing all your progress, which doesn't make sense. So yeah, energy transfer is something that should have been there from the start. I'm sure back when Equinox was first released, I wasn't playing the game, so I wouldn't know. I'm sure back when she was first released, she was fine without it, or maybe not as worse off without it. But in the current era of Warframe, it's very necessary to be able to do all this without losing your progress, because there's no incentive to swap if at base you get nothing from swapping. Furthermore, again, because of the way Mend and Maim work, either you are using night form and you're just sheer gating with Mend, or you're using day form and then you're just charging up a nuke. And that's kind of why people have said, oh, you use Equinox's 5th ability, the Sancti Magistar, or the Torrid, one of the meta picks for damage output, just so that rather than have a something in her kit, you have to use something external again to fix the issues in her kit. I've seen other suggestions that just go a little bonkers, dare I say. Changes involving the entire day-night system, people arguing for an Eclipse form, which, I see the appeal, I understand it, I simply do not agree. I know now she's about to get mocked by the new Warframe, but I still think that the day-night swapping should be kept as her thing. So anyways, let me get to my idea. So how would I rework Equinox? So first of all, I think based on the fact that, with reworks like Valkyrie's rework, or even looking at Gauss, for example, with his battery, Ember with her heat, Garuda with her damage done passive, the HUD helps people kind of see themselves growing in power, right? I think Equinox should have a HUD element around the same area, kind of like Citrene's, all like any of the ones previously mentioned, to show whether you're in day form or whether you're in night form. So for example, in night form it looked kind of like this, and then when you swap over to day form it kind of looks like this. Now the HUD can also show some more stuff like the accumulated Mend or Maim value, as well as the Metamorphosis bonus. Because if people see the buff that they're getting from Metamorphosis, they're gonna wanna keep refreshing it, because they're gonna see it decaying, and that I think will help to encourage the day-night swapping, which is what we want ultimately, or at least what I want. I don't know what you want. The passive, I would raise it from 10% to about 20 or 30%, making it a Tau Forge purple shards worth, I think would not hurt and would encourage maybe putting another shard in if you really wanted to, or maybe, yeah, or just I just want it to be meaningful, you know? 10% is nothing. And she has two channeled abilities, so to she could afford to have better sustain. There'll also be more regarding sustain that I'll talk about in a bit, but that's it for the passive. I wouldn't change a lot more to Equinox's equilibrium passive because I don't think it's a bad thing to have built-in equilibrium. Now, onto our first ability already, Metamorphosis. Now, when you change into Night form, currently you get armor and you get shield, and it decays over time. Now, back in like pre-Steel Path, I'm sure this was like insane, but in its current state, I would change it very simply to where when you change from night to day, you gain a damage boost, kind of like a roar bonus maybe. Maybe maybe keep the speed boost, but I would maybe have it be a bit more impactful, because currently even the movement speed bonus, I mean it's alright, but it could be more. Or maybe the HUD will make it noticeable, like enough by placebo, and I wouldn't actually be opposed to them doing that. With day to night, however, I would make it, instead of the current shield and armor buff, just to make it a damage reduction. Maybe it caps out at 90% scaling with power strength, and again, much like the damage boost and speed boost of the current of Metamorphosis, which I think which it currently has for night to day. I don't know why I said it would change, but either way, the values would decay, and you would see it in the HUD. But in this case, it would be damage reduction. I am contemplating whether night form should have stagger immunity or resistance. Stagger and knockdown immunity and resistance even, because it could be kind of cool, but I don't know if it would feel right or just feel like an extra bell and whistle, considering people already run, prime sure-footed if they really don't want to get knocked down, or they just run like Uneru's Poise or something else. So hard to say. Maybe status resistance in general, it's hard to say. But definitely I would put damage reduction instead of just shields and armor, because those don't do nearly as much these days. For the second ability, now rest, I would give it a mark. Now currently rest has the strings and obviously the finisher marker, and that's pretty neat. I like that. But I would also make it so that rested targets are tagged with an additional chance to drop energy orbs. This would also mean that helmet-wise, it could be a good addition to a finisher build that you want to do. But overall, the main thing is like rest can be a stun, but I would like it to also maybe be orb generation for energy orbs. Now on the other side of the equation, I would want rage to give a chance to drop health orbs. Of course, it does already have the damage vulnerability, but instead of speed boost, I would give them a taunt to look at specifically you. This way you're not using a rage as a speed booster, because, I mean, okay. As you can see right now, that it doesn't spread super well. It would make it so that it isn't a speed up ability. It is a taunt, because again, it's still a bit of risk and reward, but it's a taunt with the same damage vulnerability. And then give it, yeah, health orbs. Because health orb is red, and red is like day, and rest is blue orbs, which is like night, and energy fits with resting and supporting, whereas health orbs are like keeping alive and sustaining more damage. I just think it fits more. Also, I don't think having both an equilibrium passive and energy and orb generation is broken, because there's so many ways to do sustain these days, and Equinox has 2 channeled abilities, so again, it doesn't seem unreasonable. Plus, you still have to be active, you still have to keep casting Rest and Rage, and if you have Common Frenzy, you still need to keep casting Common Frenzy. Now, the radius for Common Frenzy, I would raise it a bit. If we look at something like Resonance, okay, Resonance is a huge radius. What's the one for lull? Basically, my point is that 5 meters is very small, and I would raise the spread radius of Common Frenzy. Also, I would change the visual effects for Rage. Rage in its current state, like, I look all the way from here, I can kind of see, but only now when I'm not in the middle of a fight. The moment like status effects happen, the moment things start moving and shooting, it's hard to tell if something's been in rage. I would give it like a fire, like a bigger fire effect, because currently there is a bit of one, but yeah, just make them glow more. I think like they're super angry at you, like they're like charging up their like Super Saiyan whatever. Like if you were to like irradiate this thing, and then you irradiate this guy, like, visually in the middle of a fight, they're not easily differentiated. So I would make more of a fire. Again, much like the HUD change, I want Equinox to be visually more understandable, because I think that would make her kit feel more impactful. For her third ability, one of the 2 channels, first of all, the cost should be fixed. There should be no scaling cost. It should not scale based on how many enemies are within the vicinity, and it should persist through metamorphosis. I shouldn't have to keep recasting it every time I swap between forms, because that just signals to me that I should not be swapping, because it's just trouble every time. For Pacify, just don't have a fall off on the debuff. It should be the same throughout. On Provoke, it should be base 30% to match with Bright Bonnet. It also, again, cost should not scale with the enemies affected, allies affected rather. Yeah. Now for both Pacify and Provoke, another thing that they could do to, massively improve the usage is to make the visuals actually understandable. To actually be like, oh, okay, this is what is happening in my Pacify. Because right now, if I activate Pacify, or if you activate Provoke, there's like the faint glimmer, right? This little ring that goes around you. And then when you're near an enemy, they kind of glow. But it's so in the chaos of battle, you're not gonna see this. You're just not. Instead, I would just have it be, okay, so there's a few options, but I think either around their heads or around their feet, much like with Gloom, which I'm about to show you. So not around their feet, around their torsos, right? You see how they all have like a little gray little gray line kind of at their stomachs, right? Have something orbiting them, like have like a sun or a moon that's orbiting each enemy affected or each ally affected by pacify and provoke, and we would already have something good. For the augment, for pacify should be a slow, much like Gloom, but it should not need build up. Build up should be a thing that you only deal with for mend and maim. It should just be like a Gloom, because it's already a mod slot. For provoke, just make it a speed up. Make it a radial speed up. So it'll take the speed increase that currently Rage has. It'll affect a wider area, or at least an area around you constantly, and yeah, and just make it so there's no build-ups on either of these effects. Passive provoke, provocation, you're agitating them to run faster at you. I think that would be fair. Not to mention, if you're swapping between the two opposites, then wouldn't the slow when you swap become the speed up? I just think it just feels like a no-brainer. Also, I don't think we need more ability strength. I don't think people are really using peaceful provocation for that extra ability strength. I think they're just gonna slot like another red Archon shard or like Augur Secrets, For her fourth ability, I think the current visuals are okay. I do think if there was a ring around it, because currently the floor visuals are like noticeable enough, but if there's a ring at the edge of it, that would be nice. Other than that though, it should have energy transfer at base. I feel like that should just be a given. Energy transfer should not be an augment in that sense. Both her channeled abilities should remain active whenever she casts Metamorphosis, because it just doesn't make sense for Equinox to have to reactivate everything if she's not wearing these band-aids. Now, mend. Now, yeah. Now, of course, that's the first part of it. But here's the second part, right? Mend should not just heal your shields. Okay? Maybe that's a weird one, because maybe you never thought about it. But mend should not only restore your shields. It's such a weird thing. Okay, can I just say that? It's such a weird thing to do that mend gives you shields on kill and then heals you in the burst. What it should do is it should heal you first, then it should give you shields, then it should go into over shields, and then here's the thing. Current mend's burst isn't very good, is it? But what if burst mend gives overguard? Make it like Dante, make it like Icy Avalanche Frost, right? Make it overguard. It would kind of conflict with the Metamorphosis buff if you are using, like, it would kind of conflict with the Metamorphosis buff because that DR would not affect overguard, but pacify does affect overguard, so it would still make sense to use the mend burst if you want overguard. The value also should not be divided. For some reason, currently, mend's effect divides the accumulated value among the allies it affects, which is weird. Just have the accumulated value give the same amount of overguard to everyone based on the accumulated value, not divided. Now, for MAME, so despite MAME having that cool massive explosion, right, that everybody is just so over the moon about, right? So this is current Equinox, right? Like, okay, I get my kills. I get all these kills, right, with men. Yes, my boy. Oh, my cat's in my room, sorry. Right, and then I swap to MAME, and then I burst. And like that's all it does right now, right? But if I use MAME, I dealt there at 36 and then a singular slash proc, and then the slash proc after it's gone, it's gone. It would be much better, in my opinion, if it gave a radial explosion every time you got a kill with MAME active. It would be a slash explosion on kill rather than just a singular hit of slash the moment they enter the radius. And also, each slash hit, I think, would not trigger a slash proc. That is a weird one, right? It could rather cause a bit of a strange chain reaction if every enemy dies and then they do a slash proc and then that explodes and then everything else gets slash proc and they explode. You know, that might be a bit too passive. So I think just a radial explosion on kill with MAME would be cool. Like centering on the enemy that died. Kind of like if you were to look at if I do that, everything around also explodes because of the main thing dying. So it would be kind of like that, but with every enemy that's within the MAME radius rather would explode when they die. And I think that would be fine. I don't think that would be broken. I think it would just mean that MAME does something. Now, meanwhile, on the other hand, I would move the slash proc to MAME's burst. You see, MAME in its current state just deals the original one, and it's affected by armor. You know, it isn't affected by armor? Slash. So, a slash proc would mean that there's a bit of extra damage to kind of keep the huge burst going, even to armored targets. And I think that would be, dare I say, a little better than in its current state, where it's a singular burst and that's it, and if you whiff it, there's no follow-up damage, there's no way to get anything more. Once you've let your main burst go out, it's gone. Now, for the augment, so if we're replacing energy transfer for making it inherent in both a third and fourth ability, what happens to energy transfer? Well, what if we changed energy transfer into a brand new augment? I've seen some very outlandish ideas. Yes, I've seen many ideas, but I'm gonna try and be as grounded as possible with this approach. For Mend and MAME, with, the idea of alliteration in mind, what about Manic Meditation? Manic Meditation disables the final burst of Mend and MAME. It no longer accumulates charge. Instead, Mend generates overguard on kill, kind of like for overgating. It should give you a bunch of iframes. It would still give you your healing and your shielding, and the overgate, isn't particularly long, but it does mean that if you're constantly getting kills, you're constantly getting multiple forms of damage gating, which can make you functionally immortal, but obviously for those who want to just be face tanking stuff, they can stick to no augment and just have the huge burst of overguard instead. The overguard on kill won't be it won't scale as easily as the burst overguard in that sense, so overall you would still be better off with the mend burst if you want to overguard tank, but this helps you with damage gating, so I think it's still pretty good, and it would still work with people who want to run a catalyzing shields build. Because it's, they're already damage gating. They might as well have another form of gating. For the MAME version, the MAME, because as I mentioned earlier, should have a explosion on each kill rather than just on the big burst. I would make the MAME explosion deal a percent of the enemy target's health as radial damage. Now, I don't know what a healthy radius in that sense would be for if you're doing something like this. I think it could cause some chain explosions, which I don't know if that's broken or not. I can't speak for the Saren players or the Auraxia players, but dealing a percent of each kill target's max health as radial damage, and then we could give them a slash proc as well, I think would make for a fun, constant group clearing kind of augment. It would mean that against acolytes, you no longer have that big explosion. Against demo units, you no longer have that big explosion. But in exchange, you can play survival quite comfortably by just kind of chain killing a lot more stuff. So it's kind of up to you, and it's no longer a band-aid. So yeah, that's my thoughts on what I would do for a Equinox rework. Again, this was meant to be an entire video on who needs a rework until I got to Equinox and I went, oh, that's a lot more content than I thought I would be talking about. So I hope you enjoy this. Who do you think needs a rework, and who should I talk about next regarding reworks? I have on my list, I have Chroma, who will be pretty short, I think, Banshee, and Ember. But obviously Equinox I found was the one most in need of DE's help. So yeah. But anyways, thank you all for watching. And let me know your thoughts. Subscribe if you haven't. Hang out in the Discord if you'd like to, and I'll see y'all in the future.